Welcome in to the Lady Vol Basketball Fever podcast, part of Vol Basketball Fever. We're a show dedicated exclusively to talking about the Lady Vols and news around the program. Tune in to hear thoughts and discussions from experts who cover the Lady Vols on a daily basis. Now, here's a new episode of the Lady Vol Basketball Fever podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome into another episode of the Lady Vol Basketball Fever podcast. I am Nathanael Rutherford, joined by our special guest here, Kellyanne Stitts of WATE here at News in Knoxville. Kellyanne, thank you so much for coming on the show again.
Hey, friend. Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, it's good to have you back. Really looking forward to talking to you because we have a lot to cover for Lady Vol basketball, especially since you and I last spoke here on the show. But before we get into all that, I want to thank all of you who are tuning in on YouTube or listening on podcast, wherever you're listening. Again, very much appreciate that. All of you are fantastic for supporting the show like you have been, especially now into the off season where we're getting a lot of news. It seems like every single week for both the men's and women's team. So I really appreciate all the support, all the likes on videos, all the subscriptions, on all just the downloads and stuff on the podcast as well. So again, if you want to like this video, you want to share it around, would really appreciate that. And also go give us a 5-star review on Apple, 5-star review on Spotify. Would also really appreciate that as well. Well, let's go ahead, Kellyanne, and get into it because, like I said, we have a ton to really dive into and talk about. Before we get, I guess, kind of into stuff that's happened in the offseason, I want to get some perspective from you because you were down there live for both the SEC tournament and NCAA tournament for the Lady Vols. So I would love to hear kind of about your experience with both of those and kind of what it was like being there for the SEC tournament, what it was like being for an NCAA tournament environment for the Lady Vols. So just, talk about some of your experiences, anything that stood out, or just, what it was like being there to cover that.
Yeah, the SEC tournament, I'll start with that in Nashville, of course, in Tennessee. So the fans, they traveled. It truly felt like a home game when they played. It was so cool. The fan and Bridgestone Arena is big, and you'd see a ton of orange. Just from the eye test and the ear test, there were a ton of Lady Vol fans there. And the funny part was, or even just the cool part, I should say, was every fan that I talked to was not from Knoxville. Now, I'm sure that they were there in droves as well. But they were all from all over, from South Carolina, from Alabama, from across the state, from all over. Just goes to show just how big the fandom is and how far wide it stretches. And everybody that I talked to, it all started with Pat Summitt, of course, right? But they all had a personal story of how they saw her at a high school camp and how they met her and how they talked with her, or had an exchange at some point. And it was really, really, really cool to hear and to see and to get that perspective from them as well. So the SEC tournament, that was one thing that really stood out to me. Unfortunately, of course, they got beat by Kentucky on the 3-ball, and then they moved ahead to the NCAA tournament in Kansas, which I was also there for. We drove. There weren't a ton of Tennessee fans there, but I don't blame them per se because that was a long, long trek. We drove, so it was like 14 hours. We hit traffic on the way there. It was like 16, so that was crazy. And aside from the grind of television, it was a really cool experience. The arena was nice. Both arenas were great. Of course, Bridgestone was really cool to have the tournament in. The arena in Kansas was cool. It was a great experience. Again, they played their hearts out. They played the best they could, but truly at the end of the day, they got outplayed by Louisville, who's a Final Four team. And I'd love to see that Rae Burrell had her one last moment of going off. And, it was different. The vibes were different. They didn't feel in the post-game press conference defeated. Now, granted, they all mentioned that they were processing the loss. Of course, you have to understand that. But yeah, in the post-game press conference, of course, they were disappointed to lose, but there was no overwhelming sense of just being super, super down on themselves that, they were proud, as they should be, to be in the Sweet 16 for the first time since 2016, to be a part of that team. And now looking towards the future and towards next season, just looking at their roster and who they're picking up and who they're retaining, I mean, it seems like the sky's the limit, of course, if they can stay healthy.
Yeah, that's been a theme that I've talked about with Maria, with you, with Cora. Like, can they stay healthy? Because they have not had a lot of luck with health. Kelly Harper and her staffs haven't. But you brought up something that I've talked about here on the podcast before about how kind of far-reaching the Lady Vol fandom is. I think that was really interesting that like pretty much everyone you talked to at the SEC tournament, they weren't from Knoxville. Like that, yeah, there's obviously a large contingent of Lady Vol fans in Knoxville, but I mean, there are Lady Vol fans all across the country. I think I want to say it was Cora did a story earlier in the year about like the NIL stuff with the Lady Vols and just women's basketball in general, and that I think Orange Mountain Designs or it was somebody that had an order overseas for a Lady Vol shirt, and I was like, that's so cool. Like the Vol fandom in general spreads far and wide. Like the Lady Vol fandom really does just seem like it reaches every corner of the earth. That's really cool.
It really seems like that. It was a really cool experience.
Yeah, no, I bet like that. That's at some point I'm going to go and watch Lady Vols in tournament time too, because obviously they'll. I'd imagine we'll get to in a second this upcoming season host again for the first couple rounds. So I would definitely want to go. I think see them next year or next season when they are hopefully inevitably another top seed in the NCAA tournament. Before we get into that though, you also mentioned Rae Burrell and seeing her kind of be able to go out with a bang in terms of she performed really well finally down the stretch. Seemed like she was trying to get her kind of got her legs back underneath her, was finally playing healthier. You could still tell she wasn't 100%. But she did get drafted as a top 10 pick in the WNBA draft, went to Los Angeles, who I seem to remember Kellyanne, another former Lady Vol great, going to Los Angeles and having success with the Sparks. But you also, you got to talk to Rae, and I may try to link that down in the description of the YouTube and the podcast too. But you got to talk to Rae. So what was it like, talking with her? And I don't know if you got to talk to her after. I know you talked to her beforehand, but it seemed like she was like very excited. And also I know her message to Lady Vol fans was that when she's leaving that she really enjoyed her time here. I think some fans were holding on to a sliver of hope that she'd come back, but obviously it didn't happen. But I'm very happy for her, and I think that going to the Sparks will be it'll be a really good fit for her. And I think it'd be very interesting to see what she can do, because I think they're going to play the young players in LA. I think Fisher has said he wants to play the young players, so hopefully she'll get some good playing time out there.
Yeah, as you mentioned, the last Lady Vol to be drafted in the first round to LA was none other than Candace Parker. So That's awesome that Rae Burrell gets to follow in that suit and that legacy. Yeah, head coach Derek Fisher said he liked her. He prioritized length and versatility and how she could impact the game in multiple ways. So she'd been on his radar for a while. But yeah, and Rae was super excited. We did get to hear from her after, but I did get the chance to talk to her beforehand when she was preparing. And she had told me, of course, and then the news came out that she had been invited to New York City. She was excited about that experience with her family because it was just the second time she's ever been to the big city. So even just the process was exciting because they get their hair and makeup done, the wardrobe, the photo opportunities, the media, and just to be there. It's a big deal. And it was really exciting. Of course, we saw head coach Kelly Harper was there as well, which I know is really special to Rae and her family. Rae was excited. She was nervous, but she was excited. She seemed very optimistic. She was training at Priority One Athletics with Sean Green. So she was staying ready, just working on little things, just sharpening up a little technique. We talked about a lot of things, of course, like as you mentioned, she was very, very grateful for her time at Tennessee. She stayed because she wanted to stay loyal to the program. And with head coach Kelly Harper coming in and her winning resume as a player, especially, and as a head coach. But what she always mentioned was, Kelly Harper was a championship. Like, she won national championships as a player, so she understood that. So she was like, well, why would I leave when I have that coming in and somebody who had done that guiding me in that way? So she had stayed loyal to the program, super grateful for her time, loved the fan base. We gushed about the fan base and how when she'd come out, they'd cheer her on, like, you got this, Rae. And when she'd make a bucket, they'd be like, Rae Burrell, the in-arena announcer. So she loved all of that. She was excited. And the only thing I thought was interesting about Rae was two things. A couple things about her was interesting was she was a multi-sport athlete growing up. So she played soccer, and she mentioned how soccer helped her basketball game, how it translated from the pitch to the court was the footwork. In soccer, you have to have really great footwork. And she said that really helped her in basketball. So I thought that little bit tidbit that she shared with me was really cool. And then, of course, having endured her first major injury of her college basketball career this season, her senior season, which is really, really tough. Injuries are tough on anybody, on any athlete, but especially your senior year coming off of the season that she had junior year was understandably extremely tough, especially mentally. So she said she had turned to guided meditations to help her through that tough time. And stay focused. Yeah, she just find him on YouTube and then find a quiet spot and do that. And she has now taken that up as a habit to help kind of relax her and refocus her. And honestly, I might try it too, because it sounds like a great idea. So those are a couple of things I thought was interesting with Rae that I learned about her. But yeah, she's really excited, really grateful for her time at Tennessee. I think she's honored to represent the Lady Vols and the Power T for the rest of her life. But then also now as she continues her journey in LA. And, you mentioned maybe fans had a sliver of hope. I'd asked her following the Sweet 16 loss if she was going to return for clarification purposes, because of course she went through the senior day. She was obviously very emotional on senior day when they lost to LSU. But John Fulkerson did dang near the same thing, right? Mm-hmm. And with the extra year of eligibility, she had, used her 4 years, but with that extra year of eligibility with COVID, there's a lot of gray area. So I just wanted to clarify that was the last time we were going to see her in orange and white. But then the way she answered kind of opened up the door to where Kelly Harper then had to do damage control and, back her up and say that was always the plan, because she has not been expecting that question. But, it's so funny in the real time when she answered, it did give that sliver of hope. And then all of a sudden, even I'm thinking, oh, wow, well, she might return, because maybe she just wanted to build off of, her junior year. And she, like you mentioned, she was playing almost to her normal self at the end, but you could also tell even when she was progressing, she was never 100%. She wasn't as fast as she was or quick as she was as the year before. So she wasn't fully 100% hurt. So you think maybe you'd want to just, come back and develop that. But again, as we see, she was picked 9th overall. So she was ready for the next step. And ultimately, as she mentioned, she was ready. And I'm very, very happy and excited to follow her journey at the next level.
Yeah, just another former Lady Vols stars who is now in the WNBA and who hopefully will carve out a role in the WNBA. And again, keep that Lady Vol brand strong in the league there, because there's a lot of former players, former Lady Vols up there that are playing well and having big roles and stuff in the WNBA. But looking ahead here, I guess kind of ahead, but looking past the season and past, of course, giving a big shout out to Rae Burrell for being drafted in the first round into the WNBA draft there. Looking at this, I guess kind of the current / future of this Lady Vol program. Of course, we all already knew, Justine Bissott was signing with Lady Vols, a 5-star, who was really, blew up in the recruiting rankings. She was not a 5-star when the Lady Vols, first offered her, and we're talking with her and everything. But then, more and more attention she got, the more people were aroused by. She has a very unique skill set as a 6'4", basically 6'4" guard. Basically, I mean, she can play the post, but she's not like a traditional post player. She has an outside shot, and she can cut to the basket. But we knew she was going to come in. If you've known about her for a while. But then we had, and actually still during this season when Lady Vols were going through tournament, Jazz Powell committed to Tennessee as a transfer. Then you had Rakia Jackson, and then just recently over the weekend, I want to say, or on Friday, it was one of the, I think it was late last week. You had another Jasmine, Jasmine Franklin of Missouri State, who actually she played for Kelly Harper at Missouri State. She announced that she's committing to Tennessee as a transfer. To me, she kind of looks like a little bit of filling that role that Alexis Dye is leaving behind, kind of a somewhat undersized kind of post player, but someone that can really attack the basket and really is aggressive on the glass. Was the Missouri Valley Conference Defensive Player of the Year a couple of seasons ago. Before obviously this past year, I think she missed a lot of time with injury. That'll be the biggest question for me, is how she bounces back from injury. But really, I think I want to talk a little bit about her, because we've talked on this podcast a lot about Rakia and Jazz, but I think getting Franklin is someone that I think, again, as long as she's recovered from her injury, I think she's a potentially really good player that can be a really good role player for this team next year.
And I love that you said that she is exactly who I thought would be a great replacement for Alexis Dye. She was the nation's second leading rebounder before her ACL injury, as you mentioned. So that's one thing I was going to see, is how she is able to come back to that, or how she was able to come back to that and rehab from that injury. But beforehand, she already has familiarity with Kelly. I feel like it's going to be that replacement for Alexis, especially on the boards. Of course, we know how big of a priority it is to win the rebounding battle with the Lady Vols and just defense in general. So I think she's a huge, huge, huge pickup for the Lady Vols.
Yeah, and like you said, she not only did she have experience playing under Coach Harper, but it wasn't just like that she played at Missouri State. She had experience on the Sweet 16 team with Kelly Harper too. It's like she has experience with like making runs in the NCAA tournament with Kelly Harper. She knows what it takes to be a Kelly Harper player, and by extension, what it means, what it takes to be a Lady Vol. And Kelly Harper and her staff have talked multiple times about how they're not going to bring someone in just to bring someone in. They have to fit the mold. They have to fit the standard of being a Lady Vol. Kelly Harper knows Jasmine Franklin better than she probably does a lot of other players in transfer portal. And so it's the fact that she saw her and said, yeah, she played for me before, she can play for me here again. Like that to me, I'm trying to get Jasmine on here on the show. I was able to talk with Jazz Powell and Rakia in interviews, but I've not, I'm trying to get Jasmine Franklin on here, hopefully to talk with her, or if not her, someone who's covered the team there at the school, Missouri, at the school she's coming from. Sorry, Missouri State. I kept wanting to say all kinds of different team names.
And for her too, you see how even Alexis Dye, which is unfortunate, she wasn't able to have it. I heard to hear this a lot. One more year with the Lady Vols. You've seen coaches talk about it too. But the way that they were able to help her develop her game at this level, I'm excited to see that also for Jasmine Franklin as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And she'll have, like, she's the person who this will be her first year at Tennessee, but she has a lot of experience and is a veteran that, again, played for Kelly Harper, but she's a person that, like, you look at Alexis Dye, had played a lot of basketball. And Jasmine's played a lot of basketball. Same thing with Keegan Green. Like, she played a lot of, obviously she had more than 1 year at Tennessee, but she played a lot of basketball. In fact, this team, this kind of, I guess, transitioning to looking ahead to next year too, a little bit. We'll talk a little bit more in a second. I want to get to the transfers in general in a second, but this team's going to have a lot of experience. Again, not all of it at Tennessee, but you look at the transfers coming in are all players that have played multiple years. Not just like you bring in a sophomore, but they're all players who played multiple years at their respective schools. Rakia played multiple years at Mississippi State. Jazz multiple years at Maryland. Other Jasmine played multiple years before coming to Tennessee as well. You look at who's on the roster. Jordan Horston is as a big veteran. Jordan Walker is a veteran who's been here for multiple years now and has a lot of college experience. You have really just a plethora of experience in that potential starting five, and also kind of the first couple ones off the bench, because you also have players who've been here a couple years now who were freshmen last year or sophomores last year. All of a sudden now they're juniors and sophomores. So you have one true freshman coming in. I don't know that they'll add another recruit in this class if they add someone else. I think if they add someone else, it'll be in the transfer portal. But this is a team that has, Kellyanne, they have a ton of experience. Again, not all of it at Tennessee, but basically every single person on that roster has at least, excluding the ones who are freshmen this year, a lot of them though have 2 or more years of playing experience in college basketball, in D1 college basketball, which that's a lot of games played under their belts.
Yeah, if you're a Lady Vol fan, you should be absolutely stoked for this upcoming season. The 3 transfers are ranked in the top 10 according to an ESPN article. That in itself is really exciting, just to show the caliber of talent that they're bringing in. And then, of course, as you just mentioned, it is a fairly experienced roster, because Jordan Horston will then be a senior. Tamari Key, you retain Jordan Walker with all that experience and leadership in the point guard position. But then think about how much playing time those freshmen had and how big they were contributing down the stretch in postseason play. They will all now be sophomores. That experience in the minutes that they were able to get because of injuries and being able to step up, I think is going to be huge next year in terms of just depth. Mm-hmm. So, you lose some key players, of course, but they're bringing in key players to then replace them, I think, from the transfer portal. And then they have another spot, as we mentioned, we talked about before. And as you mentioned, now I agree with you that I'm sure I wouldn't be surprised if they were to go to the portal to add somebody else. But just looking at who they have right now, and as you mentioned, the 5-star freshman coming in, I'd be extremely stoked. And personally, to cover the team next season, I am excited to see how they do. The expectations I'm going to guess are sky high. I'm going to guess there's going to be all these preseason watch lists for these players. You think about last year, at one point in the season, there was talks of the Final Four team before all the injuries, and they made it to the Sweet 16 with all of those injuries. So adding all this talent back to the roster, and then all of the retention, and hopefully if they can stay healthy, I think that it should be another extremely exciting year. This might be the most talented team that Kelly Harper's had since she's been at Tennessee.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that in just a second too, but to go back to kind of the experience part here, looking at the roster just right now, you have super senior Jordan Walker, you have regular seniors in Jordan Horston and Jordan Horston and Tamari Key. You'll have rising juniors in Tess Darby, Marta Suarez, and then you'll have rising sophomores and you have rising sophomores in Brooklyn Miles, Sarah Puckett, Kai Wynn, and Caroline Stripling. And again, that doesn't include the newcomers who I think most of them, well, obviously Jasmine Franklin will be, I think should be a super senior technically too, but then Jazz and Verkia are both, I want to say rising seniors, rising juniors. I forget which now.
Seniors.
Yeah. So like that is, again, that's just, there's so much experience.
I mean, either way, yeah, like you just mentioned that. What we just talked about, that's a ton of experience, even in the transfers. Seniors, super seniors, rising juniors, whatever. It's a lot of experience. A lot of ball has been played, and proven talent too. Mm-hmm. And like I just mentioned really quick, they get Marta Suarez back from injury. Yep. Somebody missed the entire season who was a contributor as a freshman. So that's got to be exciting, you'd think, right? Exactly.
Like the depth on the team, like there's going to be, I mean, the competition is going to be unreal. Like that's the thing, is like there's going to be the competition. It will be something we have not seen at Tennessee in a long time in terms of, and we've also seen Kelly Harper be, willing to play players minutes, young players minutes, not just in, garbage time, like actual minutes that matters. Like people will be getting their minutes, especially early on in the year when they're trying to figure out rotations to figure out who fits in best where and everything. But I mean, you mentioned it. This is going to be the most talented team, in my opinion, that Kelly Harper's definitely having. The most talented team Lady Vols have seen probably, gosh, in a long time, in terms of not just having talent and like having 5-star like freshmen or whatever, but having like talent and experience. Like this is a perfect blend, in my opinion, of that. And that kind of leads me into talking, before I get into looking ahead to this season, looking at these transfers, because Kellyanne, I think that was a big thing that I think fans that had questions about the level of recruiting that Kelly Harper and her staff have been able to do. Like they had brought in some good recruits and they'd done some good things, but there's a lot of questions of, okay, can they recruit to the Lady Vol standard? This isn't the traditional recruiting in terms of like, looking at 5-star prospects coming out of high school, which obviously you have Justine Pissat who fits that mold, but recruiting is a different animal altogether now because of the transfer portal. And the fact that you just mentioned it on the ESPN, as we're recording this on Tuesday afternoon, ESPN on Tuesday, I guess around lunchtime, released their like actual like preliminary transfer rankings for women's basketball. I think they ranked the top 30 transfers currently. Lady Vols right now have the number 1 transfer with Rakia Jackson, number 8 with Jasmine Franklin, and number 10 with Jazz Powell. So 3 of the top 10 transfers, including the number 1 transfer on the market this past year, are going to be Lady Vols. Like that to me, like that should, in my opinion, close the door on any questions about recruiting. I will be interested to see what happens in the 23 class for Lady Vols, because that's a really important class to help establish the future of the program. Because this was more about getting this season and a little bit into next year like set. 23 is going to be about establishing the rest of the future for the program. But me, Kellyanne, like I didn't have like a ton of questions about being able to recruit at Lady Vols, because it's kind of like the football team, but it can almost recruit itself to an extent. It's more about getting the right fits in here. But that the way the transfer portal has been handled by this staff, again, that's all on paper, but in theory, that should have answered a lot of the questions anyone had about recruiting with this staff.
Well, Coach Samantha Williams is a great recruiter. So yes, even just having her on Kelly's staff, I think has been phenomenal for them. And you're seeing that pay off now. Yeah, the transfer portal is the Wild West in men's and women's. And I think in any sport at this point, because of that, you're allowed to now start right away or play right away, even transferring within the conference. We're seeing a lot of that more often. But I want to not just to show just how, or to show just how exciting this upcoming season could be. In Kansas, I talked to longtime play-by-play announcer and voice of the Lady Vols.
I just see Kellyanne be attacked by her dog.
Appearance from my puppy Debo.
I am not going to edit this part out. This is too funny.
That's totally fine. Please keep this part. He is a rising star in himself as well. No, but I'm going to put him down as he made his little cameo appearance. But this is Debo's my new puppy. He's going to go away. So in Kansas, I talked to the voice of the Lady Vols, Mickey Dearstone. And of course, he retired. He announced his retirement in the middle of the season, that he was going, his intentions to retire after the season. So we were just talking, and I believe they picked up Rakia when it was close to the NCAA tournament, or either in Kansas or around that time. Mm-hmm. Well, we talked about it off camera, And we were both joking that he was going to pull a Tom Brady and come out of retirement once they picked up Rakia, and thinking about Rakia, Tamari Key, and Jordan Horston on the court together. And this was even before they picked up the 2 Jasmines out of the portal. So just to even show you how that excitement already had started before the season ended. Of course, we were focused on the task at hand and their season still happening. But I think that was just a little bit of a testament that, yeah, this team should be really exciting to watch. I think they're filling the needs that they're losing in Rae Burrell and Alexis Dye. And they're just building off and adding to. And, you know, with Jasmine Powell as like the true point guard, it'd be interesting to see whether, you know, Kelly will start, and this is way talking in the future, I'm talking about right here, but start Jordan Walker or kind of bring her off the bench. But either way, there's just another testament to the depth that they're going to have. And I think they're going to have enough versatility, of course, to change a lineup depending on, you know, their opponent, as you typically would. But just think about how much talent and they're able to shift around and play around. If people coming off the bench at this point, I'm going to guess, again, on paper, we'll see how they all mesh and blend together under this coaching staff and together as players. But I mean, the people coming off the bench could all basically just been the starters. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah. I mean, this could be really, really exciting to watch.
You're right. Like the bench players could be starters for like a school somewhere. Like that's just kind of and again, it may not be like, you know, a Final Four team, but they would be like the bench player since he has this year could be legitimate starters at a lot of other programs. You talked about kind of the starting lineup and what it could be. I think you make a good point. You know, I don't think we'll see the same starting 5 every single game. And hopefully it's not because of injury. Hopefully it's because, like you said, there's versatility where you have
out there now ahead of time.
Yeah, right. Where you have the ability to play bigger. Obviously, Tamari, I mean, she's going to start. I'd imagine she never loses a starting job unless she, you know, gets hurt or whatever. I imagine the 2 that are guaranteed are going to be Tamari Key and Jordan Horston. But you're right. Like I think Jazz definitely starts a point guard because she's a true point guard, whereas Jordan Walker was brought in as kind of a combo guard and was, you know, had to play point guard because Tennessee didn't really have a true point guard to fill that role. I still think she plays. Yeah, she did, and she did a good job too. I think she will still, like you said, most of the time start at that 2 because I think she's I will be interested to see how much better of a shooter she can be when she's off ball, when she's not having to be the floor general and distributing as often as she is. But it'd be nice to have another, like, she's had so much experience now being a ball handler. Now you have another really experienced ball handler along with Jazz Powell out there as well. You have Horston, who's an experienced ball handler who, you know, she's capable of leading your team in every single category on the stat sheet. You'll have Tamari Key and you have Rakia Jackson. I imagine she'll start as the 4 for Tennessee.
And so too.
So yeah, so then you throwing in, like you said, just a bunch of experience off the bench as well there. But like you said, you have the ability to go more small ball. You have the ability to kind of play 3 forwards if you want to. And well, I guess technically, like, Jordan is Horston is kind of a guard, but I mean, she's a 6'2" guard, so she can play, you know, post if she needs to or it wants to. But you have Marta Suarez, who's also 6'2", is kind of that guard forward type hybrid. It's going to be really fun to see some of the lineups that this team can run. And, you know, again, you have, you know, what can Caroline Stripling, you know, she showed some flashes down the stretch where she got more minutes and she was played. Sarah Puckett flashed a lot of potential. Brooklyn Miles flashed a lot of potential. Kai Wynn, if she develops her offense, then Kai, I think, is going to be really good because she's one of the best defenders on the team. She's needed to, you know, develop her shot some more. So I think Kellyanne, that, like, again, there's still a spot left. Like, I'll be interested to see what they do with the other spot, but, like, we'll talk about it now, I guess. But, like, the expectations for this team this year, I think, are going to be really high, and I don't blame anyone for, you know, this isn't a case of me saying, like, you know, that I would say, like, well, hold your horses, you know, wait till we see. There's legitimate reasons to have really high hopes for this team, as long as we're healthy, because, I mean, this is a really talented, really experienced team with, I think, a really good coaching staff as well. Like, the expectation should be finishing top 2, maybe winning the SEC. I think South Carolina's going to be so good again this next year that it'll be tough to win the SEC, but, you know, number 2 in the SEC behind the reigning national champion, nothing to sneeze at. And I think expectations, you know, fair or not, will be Final Four for this team for a lot of fans. And again, if you're healthy with this roster, I 100% can see them being a Final Four team. Again, that's, you know, there's still a lot of roster turnover to happen. That's been happening in women's basketball in general. There's so many teams that aren't even close to having their rosters filled out. So, holding off on all that, considering and seeing what teams do, like Maryland, especially as a big, big one to have a lot of turnover. Like I wait and see kind of how rosters play out. But really, like the SEC should, in theory, be going through Columbia and Knoxville next season.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the expectations are going to be sky high. I think there's already excitement and buzz around the program in this offseason, which is great. And just a quick comment too, going back to, we're just talking about the players and the expectations and everything too. I'm interested to see, as you went through the list of the freshmen and again, how you mentioned the glimpses of at the end that they were able to show. I'm really excited to see how they develop in their second year. Again, even just another reason why I think fans will be so excited, as you mentioned, the Final Four expectation. I'm sure that's going to re-come into the picture, re-enter the picture. And I agree. I mean, I think if everything can go as planned, of course, this is all preseason talk. This is all way in advance, talk. But still, I mean, I think there should be a lot of excitement, a lot of buzz around this team.
Yeah, and one thing that I think is going to be interesting to watch for next year is something that both, when I got to talk to Jazz and Rikio both, mentioning, one of the things that Coach Harper had talked to them about, and one of the reasons they chose Tennessee is that Coach Harper is not making it quiet. She's no secret. She wants to play faster. Like, she wants to play more up tempo. That's why she's brought in a Jazz Powell and a Rikia Jackson, is because she wants to play faster and be able to run up and down the court more and have a faster paced offense and I guess defense too. So I think seeing if the pace is, the tempo is up this year, what they can do, how does that affect things? Are they going to press more on defense? Does that, lead to more turnovers, defensively? Because they also on offense struggle with turnovers.
Committed so many turnovers, right?
Right. That's the thing to me is I want to see that faster tempo, but I want to see it be better controlled. And I think that's where bringing in Jazz Powell as a true point guard really helps, because you have, a better a higher, I guess, point guard IQ, because, Jordan Walker has a high basketball IQ. I'm not taking anything away from her, but just having that natural skill set of someone who's played point guard for years and years and years, it can make a difference. And Jazz, I talked about the big reason why she wanted to come to Tennessee is because she likes playing faster and likes being able to, dish off the ball to really talented players. But, she's capable of scoring herself too. But I think the biggest things for me are seeing the development of the fast-paced offense and cutting down on turnovers. That was the biggest issue. Obviously, free throw shooting was bad, and that was an issue for the team too. That you can keep practicing in the gym and get better at. Turnovers was a matter of, people kind of still playing out of position a little bit. People who, a lot of players that are younger in there and maybe trying to do a little too much. This year's team will be extremely experienced. I think hopefully the turnover numbers will go down, not just a little bit, but like maybe significantly. And that really, along with injuries, were the only two things that really held Lady Vols back, were the injuries and the turnovers. If they'd stayed healthy and cut down even just slightly on the turnovers, that's a team that is I think at least in the Elite Eight, maybe playing in the Final Four this year. But again, this next year, that's what I think they can do is if they cut down on the turnovers a good chunk and stay healthy, that is to me on paper is a Final Four team.
I 100% agree with you. I mean, everything you just said is exactly what I'm thinking too as well. I think those are two injuries and turnovers were two of their biggest flaws last year. So, and like you mentioned too, just bringing that experience second year, I think that should help. If they can do that, I mean, why wouldn't you think this could be a Final Four team?
Yeah, exactly.
The proven success they even had last year, despite all the adversity.
Yeah, and it's going to be, again, we don't know all of the teams and stuff Lady Vols are going to have to play non-conference wise, but it's again going to be a tough schedule. You look at all the teams. Tennessee played all four Final Four teams. Obviously, one of them was Louisville. They played in the tournament, but they played Louisville, they played South Carolina, they played Stanford, they played UConn. Like, that was a brutal schedule they had this year. And then, of course, you throw in a bunch of the other NCAA tournament teams they played, like, from non-conference play, and with Texas. You look at the Florida schools, you look at some of the Big 12 schools, and obviously the SEC schools they played. I think this upcoming year, it'll be really interesting to see how deep the SEC is, because I think for the most part, the league's going to take a little bit of a step back. But Kim Mulkey's doing a really good job of retooling the LSU roster. There's been some really good additions in the transfer portal by some SEC schools too. So it's not going to be, I don't think, as maybe deep as it was this past year, but it's still not going to be a league that you can just go out there if you're Tennessee and win any game you besides South Carolina that you play. So I think that they'll be tested again. They'll have probably a really good, just like this past year, really good resume on paper for making a case for maybe being, I hope, a 1 seed again, because that's be the first time they've been a 1 seed in, oh God, I'll look it up, but it feels like it's been almost a decade or so since they've been a 1 seed.
Right. Yeah, I would imagine so. And yeah, it'd be interesting to see what the schedule looks like next year. But I believe Kelly Harper's mentioned before that she wants to have a tougher schedule. They're not going to shy away from a challenge. They want that challenge, as do I think typically a lot of head coaches that can actually continue to compete with that level of experience. They want that. They want their players to be contending in those early games, those early non-conference tough games, to then prepare them for the postseason.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen it, like you said, not just with Lady Vols, but a lot of head coaches, but that, go to the men's side. Rick Barnes has mentioned that being a big focus is getting tough non-conference. It was a big focus. Yeah, it was a big focus under Bruce Pearl when he was at Tennessee too. I think the teams that schedule better non-conference wise, to me, like I would be interested to actually go back and see if it was the case. But to me, I think it prepares you better, and those teams have better success in postseason play than the teams who have weak non-conference schedules, basically.
100%. I agree with you.
Yeah. So it looks like, I think the last time Tennessee was a number 1 seed was 2014, it looks like. So it has been almost a decade. I was right. It felt like it'd been about that long. So I think 2014 they were, unless I'm reading this incorrectly, I think they were the number 1 seed in 2014 in the Louisville region, I think. So I think so. So it's been a while, but regardless, it's been a while since Lady Vols.
Yeah, either way you slice it, it's been a long time.
Yeah, I'm looking at kind of their seeding and stuff. Yeah, here, seeding through the years. Yeah, last time they were number 1 seed was 2014, and then they lost in the regional semis that year. Lady Vols has been number 1 seed so many times, but it's been, I guess by the time next year comes around, it'll have been 9 years. Of course, there wasn't a tournament in 2020, so it won't be 9 tournaments, but it'll be 9 years since they've been a 1 seed. If they get it. I think just being a 2 seed would be really cool. Like I think it'd be really awesome to get to a 2 seed, because they haven't been a 2 seed since 2015. So it'd have been a while since they've been one of those top 8 teams in the NCAA tournament. Whereas that used to be consistently where the Lady Vols were. It was a disappointment if they weren't one of the a 1 or a 2 seed in the NCAA tournament. Pretty much.
And that would show you even just how far the program is progressing under head coach Kelly Harper in what, in my opinion, a short time. So, that'd also just be great for the trajectory and the resurgence of, the program and taking it where it should be.
Well, Kellyanne, before we get you out of here and before we end the show, again, I was really interested to hear your experiences in the tournament, but just kind of looking back at this whole season, you covered the team all season. You got to talk to the players and the coaches. What was kind of a big takeaway maybe you had from the year? Because you got to talk to, I imagine, Coach Harper. I don't know about the assistants, but I assume that I don't recall them talking to the media a ton. But was there any kind of big takeaways from any of the players, from Coach Harper, for anything this past year? Because again, they did a good job, I think, of presenting the players and coaches and stuff to the media. Women's basketball, especially, I think they try to do that more to get more coverage, and the women's sports need more coverage, and I appreciate that Tennessee understands that and tries to do a good job of getting that coverage out there. It seemed like, and being available. So I was just curious, was there any big takeaways, anything that you learned about Coach Harper, learned about the team that maybe hasn't gotten the attention, or maybe that you just want to reiterate? Because I know you've done a lot of different features. I've watched some of the videos, not just of women's basketball, but you did with the football team, that you've done with the men's team. But there's just a lot of stories, really cool stories out there for the athletes and the coaches and stuff. So I didn't know if there's one that you had that really stood out to you from this past year that you wanted to highlight.
I would say maybe not one thing specific. I did get the opportunity to sit down with Kean Green, and she is so wise. She's just wise behind her ears. She was so great. Very, very conversational. We talked for, I think, almost like 20, 30 minutes. It was crazy, and it didn't feel like that. Very, very wise. I could see, everybody talked about just her leadership, and I can see that. Obviously, it's hard to see if you're not a part of the team. Like we hear about, you can see it to an extent on the side, or on the bench when she's trying to coach and warm-ups and stuff, and on the court here and there. But really, we're not a part of the program. We're not there on the day-to-day. But just even talking to her, I could totally see where that that comes from. But I think what stuck out to me the most, and what Kian talked about and what they talked about all season long, was just how close the team was and how they were truly playing for each other, but top down. From coaches to the support staff to the players, for everybody was truly fighting for everybody. I mean, you even saw it when Kelly would get fiery about a bad call or missed call or something she didn't agree with. She would go to bat for her players. But they would also go to bat for her. They would internalize whether she was pressing very hard in coaching. That's one thing that Kian had mentioned. We saw that locker room, that halftime blip from her. I can't remember what game it was now where she.
Oh man,
I
think it was the.
I know it because
it was the road game against Auburn or Ole Miss. I want to say.
It was, Kian and I talked about it. My goodness, of course it slips my mind, but everything's a blur nowadays of the season. But still, when she had that fire moment, we all saw on the SEC network. Kian said she's really good coach in terms of when to know. Of course, she's really good coach in general, but this aspect of when to press her players and when to give that tough love and when to kind of pull back. Of course, we saw in that moment that very aggressive tough love. But I think it fires up the players. When she gets at them, typically more times than not, they turned it around. If they were struggling in the first half, they came out and turned around those explosive third quarters. But at the end of the day, even through all the adversity, I think teams at that time, you can crumble if you don't have that strong foundation as a team trying to fight for each other. You can easily let the season slip away from you, but they didn't. Even when they went through that rough patch without Kian initially, they still continued to fight. And you just saw that in the players, and you constantly heard that. So I thought that was really cool to see play out throughout the season.
Yeah, and to speak to that too, that's been a big thing, the culture and how close the players are of. Again, when I've been able to talk to Jazz and Rakia, they mentioned that was a big reason they chose Tennessee, is because they saw that and they loved the culture. And Rakia said that her teammates are, and the relationship she has with them is huge, and she saw how close this team was with each other and how they cheered for each other and treated each other. And Jazz mentioned that they greeted her at the airport. She's like, I've never had anybody do that on any of the visits I'd had, like come actually like the head coach and people greeting me at the airport. So like, yeah, I think that to me is one of the big things that stood out. And both Lady Vols and the men's team, they both seem to be very tightly knit this year. And I think it's partially because of the cultures both those the coaches have established, but I also wonder if it played into the fact that the season before that was the COVID year, and there was so much distance that off season. You obviously literally distance with isolation and stuff like that. Even when you were together as a team, like it was a very different experience. I wonder if that also played into it, that, hey, this feels a lot more normal. We actually can interact and feel like a team rather than just kind of a group of individuals. I think that, also played into it. But again, I think it's also the fact that Kelly Harper and Rick Barnes both have done a really good job of establishing, healthy cultures inside their program, and cultures that are, people toss around the word family a lot. I think it feels kind of like family, I think, for both of them. But just regardless of what word you want to use, like it's a culture that is built on respect of one another and wanting to see, that player, your teammate, have success, even if you're not having success.
Mm-hmm. And I think too, the cultures they established, and it's unique about the Lady Vols with head coach Kelly Harper is truly a family. And you said, yes, you hear it tossed around all the time, but I think you can really see the difference, especially when consistently all of the players are backing that up. And of course, you also see Kelly's family is the Lady Vols. I mean, her husband's an assistant. Her kids are always around the program. We had Jackson's takeover day, which is like the highlight of the year at the time. So, and I was talking to Keen about that, and they like that. They like that family atmosphere. They always talk about, the post game locker room celebrations when they would win. That was, we'd see them on social media, but then asking the players to elaborate on that moment, or before they'd post on social media, they'd light up. And the post-game press conferences, the ones that they would win, good vibes all around. And even just talking to Kian, it wasn't only the culture, but she mentioned just individually the players. I think everybody just kind of bought into that culture and what they were preaching, and bought into it fully. And I think you just see that product of, she said, there was nobody in the locker room who was about themselves and their individual stats and padding their stats and their resume and accolades. Everybody wanted to play for each other. And I think it even goes to show when Jordan, during her breakout season, of course, before her injury, and you'd ask questions pertaining to her. She'd somewhat talk about herself, but mostly it was just about the team. So, you know, you have players like that, elite players who are literally filling up every category of the stat sheet, but they are not talking about themselves and just giving credit to the team. So you saw that culture. I'm excited to see how that grows. And hopefully, you know, I don't see why that would change even with the new players, but see them now come into that locker room, I think will be exciting. But that's one thing that stuck out to me specifically from this past season. And I'd also I wanted to talk to Coach Williams before about her TikToks. So hopefully I can do that now. I think making a TikTok with her would be phenomenal. Maybe she could teach me some things, because she absolutely not only kills the game in the recruiting, but she also kills the game in TikTok.
She does. And then people love them to eat them up, because she's, like I said, she's funny on there. She has a really good sense of humor. I like seeing the stuff that she produces. But Kellyanne, this has been wonderful. I really appreciate you coming on and taking time out of your busy work life as a sports reporter to do the podcast with me. It's been a while since you've been on, so I'd love for you to go ahead and plug your stuff and let everybody know if they want to come follow you on Twitter, if they want to see what you're doing, let them know where they can find your work and how they can interact with you.
Yes, if anybody wants to keep up with everything happening on Rocky Top and at the high school level here in Knoxville, you can follow me on Twitter at Kellyanne Stitts. I think that's the main platform you like to follow me on. I do post some of my work on YouTube as well, which is under my name, Kellyanne Stitts, but I cover everything. Sorry, my dog is playing. Also, if you want to see pictures of my dog, you can also follow me on social media. But yeah, if you want to keep up with everything happening on Rocky Talk by me and WWE, WWE Raw just came to town on Monday, and I got to interview Knoxville's own Bianca Belair, the superstar. She's fabulous, a fabulous person, genuinely one of the nicest athletes I've met and had the pleasure of talking to. And she was able to defend her Raw Women's Championship title here in Knoxville. I just interviewed her. So if you're interested in also that kind of content, feel free to give me a follow and check it out.
Awesome. Yep. I'll leave some links to Kellyanne's Twitter and everything like that on the description here in YouTube and on the podcast, so y'all can go find it pretty easy on there. But thank you again, Kellyanne. And again, thank you to all of you who watched along, listened along, however you consume this. Really appreciate all of you. And if you have any questions, any suggestions, anything you want to know about in future episodes, leave us a little comment on the video, or find us on Twitter and Facebook. We're at Vol Hoops Fever on Twitter, Vol Basketball Fever on Facebook. Signing off for Kellyanne, I am Nathaniel, and this has been another episode of the Lady Vol Basketball Fever Podcast.